I'm not sure if I realized then as much as I do now how my work and life balance suffered.
During the 80s, independent radio or pirate radio was having a huge moment in Ireland, especially because the FM broadcasting technology was playing a huge role on how radio was transmitted. Don, who is currently an active listener coach, fell in love with independent radio so much he started working to provide services to those radio stations once they got legalized by the regulators. Through his journey, he faced several people who opposed and threatened him, lost the contract he worked so hard to get, and finally, after achieving his goals, he realized that success was not what he had envisioned. After overcoming every challenge and fuck-up, Don was able to create a successful business. And later on in his life, during the big financial crisis of the '08, he had the realization that he needed to change something in his life and decided to become the CEO of Talkback and Coach Talk, where he helps organizations facilitate internal communications. Also, I wanted to share with you that I am working on a video to show you how I'm making these stories and these episodes come to life. And so if you'd like to know how I'm finding those founders and what happens after that, you can join our Patreon to get access to that exclusive content and support our mission to shine a light on these untold stories. Hey, I am Sam, your host, and this is Startup Fuck-Ups. Thank you, Don, for being here. And how are you today?
I'm great, Sam. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thanks for inviting me to do this. This is a great podcast you have. What a great name.
Yeah, thank you. And you know what? I really got inspired by so many failures that I've seen in my life and from other people. And I've been discovering a lot about the founders who dare to tell their stories.
That's the way it is, isn't it? We all, I think, draw inspiration from people who've done great things or we consider have done great things. So I would be the same. I'd be the same as you. I draw from other people and what they have achieved and left behind as a legacy.
Definitely. All right, so Don, I know that your story is not happening in the recent years, and this is something new for my podcast. All of the people that I have had as a guest were telling me stories about the recent years, about perhaps technology, but your story happened a while ago. And I know it had to do with how radio stations worked in Ireland, but why didn't you tell me more about the context and what year was everything happening?
Sure, be delighted to. Well, what happened to me at a very early age, really. First of all, I wasn't quite sure when I was leaving school what I was going to do or who I was going to be. And in the 70s, when I was leaving school, there wasn't a lot of career guidance or advice around. So I was just told, oh, you'll be good at sales. You're good at talking to people. So I ended up in a department store in Dublin called Switzer's about 2 weeks after I finished school. So in June 1973, can you believe it? I started a department store, and I was good at listening and talking with people, and so I was quite good at sales. And those days was a management trainee type of program. So I stayed there for a while. I did a little bit more studying, and then I got interested in advertising. My parents always told me I was more interested in the ads on television than the programs.
Okay.
Possibly because in the 70s the programs weren't terrific. Anyway, the ads weren't much better, but I got hooked in. So somewhere along the line I got interested and started to study advertising. I never got to college. I went straight into work and then started study things at my third level at night. So advertising and marketing, things like that. That drew me towards selling advertising.
Yeah.
I became assistant national organizer in the Lifeboat Institute, which is called the RNLI. Would be the Coast Guard in Spain or other places of the world, but it's the RNLI and also the Coast Guard here in Ireland. I sold magazine ads for their annual magazine. And then at the same time, and this is where radio really gripped me, a
Mm-hmm.
friend of mine was doing a pirate radio program
Okay.
on a pirate radio station.
Okay.
And he was going on holidays. And I said to this chap, PJ, who's still a good friend of mine living in France, if you're not there some week, I'd love to do that radio program. So that came and that happened, and he asked me to do the thing for 2 weeks while he was away.
Okay.
Now, in those days, it was all vinyl or albums or records. What you had to bring your own. So
Okay.
I brought mine in a case. I had a few by that stage
Mm-hmm.
to what was effectively a bicycle shed behind a hotel in the south side of Dublin, and lots of pirate radio stations operated from strange locations.
Okay.
And you brought your records and you turned on the microphone and you didn't really know what was going to come out, except it was usually reading the credits of the vinyl, and off you went.
Interesting.
I absolutely loved it and decided this is something I really want to do. So in quick succession, I then moved to different radio stations over the next few years.
Mm-hmm.
Whilst I was with the RNLI as assistant organizer, then I moved more into publishing and more better paid work, if you like, but continued with the radio until I come to one particular company where they weren't that keen on me being involved with pirate radio, because they had a lot of work with the national broadcaster here called RTE. And there was a very uncomfortable relationship between, well, the people who were in it called it independent radio and local radio, and the people who weren't in it and were very much against it called it pirate radio.
Interesting, of course.
So, yeah. So in this part of the world, at around about the same time, the most famous pirate radio station was called Radio Caroline.
Okay.
And that operated off the waters of Britain and Ireland. So I got hooked, and then I left the RNLI. I had my son was born in 1983, my daughter was 1985. Just wasn't enough money in the charity business where I was working as a job, so I needed to get other business. So into another business, and so I was asked to join a radio station in Cork, South Coast Radio, and become the sales manager for them in South Coast Radio, for agencies, for big advertisers, for banks and building societies and big companies.
Okay.
And it's an interesting thing because large companies were quite happy to advertise on pirate radio stations.
Okay.
Yet it was supposed to be illegal. So this is where the business idea came from. I got the idea when I was traveling from Cork to Dublin, that at some stage in the future, and now we're at 1983, 1984, that sort of period, 85, 86, I got the idea that eventually proper independent radio will be established in Ireland, and somebody would need to sell as a group the radio stations to advertisers, so to group them together. So Airtime Limited, which was my company, was formed in 1983 with the idea of selling the network of radio stations. And I did that for pirate radio stations during the 80s up to about 88, 89, when the Broadcasting Act in Ireland came into being. And so pirate radio stations needed to stop. And they were forced to stop and raided by the police, the Garda as we call them here, and closed down and transmitters taken and all sorts of things. Very interesting times. So that moved on. The Broadcasting Act came into being in 1988. I then formed a real organization to become the central sales agent for local radio stations. Now we're up to the 90s. In 1991, I was working with Business and Finance magazine, selling advertising. And they actually, this was a big company in Ireland.
Yeah, sure. Just a quick question around that. Just things into perspective. Around that time, around 85, 86, where you were doing this, what was the technology that everyone was so hype about it? Just to put into perspective what was happening at the same time.
Okay, well, it's interesting you should ask that, Sam, because the technology was changing from AM or medium wave, as it used to be known, to FM. So FM was just frequency modulated. FM Before that was very high frequency, VHF
Okay.
was the thing, and then that became FM. Now, I'm not a technical person, you'll know much more about this, but it essentially was all about frequencies that were much clearer and traveled in straight lines. That's my understanding of FM, whereas AM and long wave, LW, which was well known in Britain and Ireland, would be received in a different way. FM, broadly speaking, went in straight lines, and if you were in the right place, you could get a really, really clear stereo radio signal. So that became a big development, and I suppose the station here in Dublin that really became the superpower radio station, pirate radio station, was Radio Nova.
Okay.
And it was on 88 FM. It was also the first station in Ireland to use the phrase clutter-free. So you used to get these very deep, and I'm not one of the voiceovers, but you got these fantastic voiceovers dropping in, and it would say, clutter-free Radio Nova, broadcasting all over Dublin now, and stuff like that. And this was the big thing. And it also became music-only radio, very little speech. So this was a huge development in Ireland at the time. Along came the close down, and then real radio was allowed to pitch and become licensed and so on. So that all became a reality in 1990 and 1991, during which time I had put together a document, particularly in 1991, with a couple of colleagues. And we were given the opportunity to pitch for a central selling organization for local radio stations. This is where it really gets interesting, Sam, and I think is the core of your startup FUU something K ups. So when we put in a document in 1991, we had a huge amount of support from local radio stations. There's a thing called a media conference over here that happened every year. Radio stations were there. I was there. We pitched the whole idea. We had a lot of support, and we're basically told, yeah, we definitely want you to do this for us. Mm-hmm. But when it came to the actual award in the contract, we had put in a large document, giving all the kind of details of how this could operate. And we put it into a place called the Independent Radio and Television Commission, the IRTC, in 1991.
Because when you... because when you walked up with your friends and you started to work on this, what was your plan? What you were trying to accomplish? We
wanted to be awarded the license. This would be a licensed, formal, central sales organization for local radio stations.
Okay.
And we had a lot of support from advertising agencies, who were the people who handled the big companies like Cadbury's and banks and Santander, any of the big companies that you might be aware of and that might have operated over, all the motor companies, but not the smaller companies. So if you were a small shopkeeper in any of the areas in Ireland, they weren't the type of advertisers. They would be handled locally by the radio station's own sales representatives.
Okay.
So we put in our document, and this was very widely advertised. Submissions are requested to, become the central sales organization, and we put in our document. And it was very interesting. We put in our document about 9 weeks later, out of the same IRTC, the Independent Radio and Television Commission, a document was launched and given wide publication called the Keogh Report.
Okay.
And at that time, the Keogh Report in 1991 was 80% made up of our document. So we had discovered that, in fact, they didn't really know much about it. What we knew far more about it. And so our document was put out there as the Keogh Report. And it was well known that, Airtime and Don Harris and his colleagues had put this thing together, but now it's coming out as the Keogh Report. So anyway, we had to apply, and we put in our document, and around about that time, Christmas up to 1991, I was very, very strapped for cash. We were very, very short of money. Okay. I had children, I had overheads. So very, very tough times. I had to sell my car to have money to put into Airtime Limited.
Okay.
And these are the nice stories that happen, and it's worth knowing.
Mm-hmm.
I had a Renault 9
Mm-hmm.
car, which at the time wasn't a bad car.
Okay.
I went to a very local, we call it a garage, you might call it a motor dealer,
Mm-hmm.
in the area. And he was a main Renault dealer. And I
Okay.
happened to know him through my golf club.
Okay.
And I brought in the car, and this is we're past Christmas now, we're into January.
Mm-hmm.
I was threatened coming up to Christmas, by the way, by some stations that said, we'll put you out of business. I mean, literally had that phone call a few days before Christmas. If you don't see it our way, not some very nasty doings. And that's copper fastened, I'm sorry to say, by the minister at the time, who was involved with the Broadcasting Act, in the end went to prison and serving some time for some irregularities that were going around about the awarding of the national license. And that all happened and is well documented after 1988, around about 1990, 91. I can't tell you the actual year that he in the end had to admit there was some.
And just to out of curiosity, when those calls, I mean, who was opposing you, and what were they trying to oppose? I mean, what didn't want they?
There were some elements. I won't name anybody, obviously, but there were some elements who had their own agenda to see things their way. And then, as it turned out, I now understand that they were going to be a competitor, but they didn't say so at the time.
Okay.
They were just individuals who, difficulties.
Interesting.
Anyway, I got through Christmas 1991, sold the car in January 1992 for what was, I was looking for €7,500. We might have been punts. I think it was euros then even. Can't swear. I think we joined the EU, but I think it might have been punts that became euros. I can't remember the actual time, but anyway, whatever it was, I wanted $7,500 to put into the company. The man who bought the car from me, I drove the car into the motor dealership. He walked around the car. I think this is a wonderful story for anybody who understands what real support is about. He looked at the car. He looked at me. He didn't get into the car. He didn't start the car.
Mm-hmm.
He said to me, I can't give you $7,500, Don. I can give you 7,000. I said, well, Paddy was his name. Don't want to embarrass him. That would be fantastic, Paddy. Thank you so much. That would be just such a help.
Yeah.
He then called into the girl in the office who worked for him.
Okay.
I think her name was Breda. And said, Breda, can you give this man a check for €7,000? And then he said to another gentleman who ran the parts division, Paddy, will you give this man a lift home to his house? And I walked away in the space of 10 minutes with a check for €7,000 or punts, and went straight to the bank and put it in the account.
Okay.
That saved the company. It saved me. I'd sold the car. And then in the course of the rest of into 92, we were now, we did not get the contract.
Okay.
Because the IRTC awarded with no discussion the contract to another body who I won't mention either.
Okay.
The radio stations who were gathered in this large meeting room, and there would have been about 21 people, at least 21 stations, were very, very disappointed. They dropped into me, they came to me with the document and said, we're very sorry, Don, we weren't allowed to vote. There was no vote. We were just told by the chairman of the IRTC what to do. And we weren't given the vote that we were told we would get.
Wow.
So the contract was awarded to some. This is the nub of things for your podcast, Sam, because I know that people want to learn from this. The nub was it was given to a different company.
Yeah.
But that company did not have the support of the advertising agencies and other people.
Okay.
And on top of which, in the front of the document that they had put in to win the contract, they had put in a phrase and an endorsement at the front of their document, which said, supported by the Institute of Advertising Practitioners in Ireland.
Okay.
And when I saw the document, I was surprised by that statement, because I knew the secretary, who was also a lovely gentleman, And when I saw the document, I rang him up
Mm-hmm.
and said to the same gentleman, Jim, could I come and see you? I have a document here which I think you might be interested in. I'm a little bit surprised by something it says. And this company has been awarded a contract that we were looking for the last number of years.
Okay.
And being the gentleman that Jim was, he said in his lovely gentleman way, of course, Tom, please come up and see me. I'll have the kettle on. I arrived up to his office, which wasn't that far away, with the document, and we sat across in kind of the way we're talking now, even there's a bit of a distance between us. We were facing each other at a table,
Uh-huh.
and I slid the document across, and I said to him, there you are, what do you think of that? Would you like to read the page on the inside front cover?
Yeah.
And he read the page, and he looked at me, and he said, how very interesting, Don. As a matter of fact, we don't know anything about this endorsement.
Okay.
And if we were going to endorse anybody, we would have endorsed you as well. So I think I might have to have a meeting with the president.
Okay.
That's what he said.
Wow.
And then he said, I'll ring you back in a couple of hours.
Okay.
He rang me back in a couple of hours and said to me, I spoke to the president. We had a little meeting, and there's going to be another meeting, and we'll get the agencies made aware of this point, and I'll let you know. That's kind of how he put it to me on the phone.
Okay.
So 2 weeks later, he came back to me and said, I think there might be a bit of a change going to happen.
Okay.
And so within a matter of weeks from having not got the contract that I've been looking for 10 years,
Okay.
we lost the contract, or didn't get it, I should say. If we didn't have it, we kind of lost it, but we didn't get it.
Mm-hmm.
But in a matter of weeks, it was widely said that the advertising agencies were not supporting the people who had been awarded the contract and would not give them their support, and would make up their own mind where the support for the first central sales organization for local radio stations was going to be and who they wanted to deal with. And that's the way we'll go.
Okay.
So that's what happened. So they were rejected. That's really happened. What happened by the advertisers and the organizations. So the stations and the organization body had to go back to the drawing board and re-advertise, at which time we were successful this time.
Okay.
And got the contract that we've been looking for. And so the lesson there is never give up, have belief in your own abilities and your own contacts and your own knowledge, really. If you think something isn't right and it smells wrong, it probably is wrong. And maybe you were right. And so don't give up. So we went forward, we won the contract, we launched in June 1992.
Okay.
The interesting thing about this is, now I don't know the pounds, so you might be able to work this out, but we'll say around about 65 pounds probably. From my point of view, in those days, it was 9.5 stone, 9.5 stone, which was pretty light, very light for me. I'm 6 feet high. So very light and not well. I wasn't able to drive. I was very, very stressed.
Okay.
My wife had to kindly drive me around places, and I was really quite stressed, and I went to the doctor on a number of occasions. So we launched the program, the company, and I had played golf the week before.
Mm-hmm.
Then we launched the company on a Wednesday, and then I played the weekend after because it was a thing called the Captain's Prize, and I won that competition in the golf club by the biggest amount and percentage that anybody's ever won that prize. It was called the Captain's Prize, and I won it by what they would call points, 50 points, which for one person on their own is extraordinary, and 57 shots net.
Okay.
So better even than professional status, if you like. And that was clearly an indication of the relief, the fact that I had achieved this, and I felt so just stress-free.
I mean,
so there's a lesson there that I believe one part of your life very much affects the other part of your life, whichever way it is, either your home life or your work life.
Yeah.
And that was the start of a contract that lasted for 5 years until 1997. And then I launched Talkback and went in the whole area of coaching and feedback and a different era.
That's really interesting. Yeah. And I mean, because of course you were having these feelings because you were going for 10 years with this. You started in the pirate radio or independent radio, and there's this backlash of people on this movement. And currently, this is the technology that everyone is paying attention to, right? The radio was the communication strategy that was taking the new communications with the FM expansion. And then you also get those people calling you and threatening you because they didn't want you to succeed, or they were trying to oppose.
Oh, totally. Yeah, they were opposed because they had their own agenda. They were, although they didn't say it, I discovered afterwards they were also pitching for the same contract incorrectly, and not. I have to be careful to say, but not in a good way. Mm-hmm. And so we won out in the end with correct procedures and the goodwill. That's the other thing. The goodwill nowadays will be known as connections and networking and all those things that you do. But we had put 10 years into building those connections. We'd been in the pirate radio stations. I traveled to every station in the country. Excuse me, at that stage there was 21 or 22 or 23 maybe. I'd seen every other one of those radio stations in different parts of the country, little studios. Mm-hmm. And it was a joy, and I'd built up all those networks.
Now we can think about, there was their agenda and perhaps it was a power shift and they were seeking for that. But in that moment, what went through your mind? What was going on your mind?
Well, the day I discovered that we did not get the contract, I was absolutely distraught and very, very upset.
Okay.
Because I did not know what I was going to do. I put everything into this. I put money into it. My father had lent me money. To start up. In those days, really, you wouldn't get money to put into it in a loan. And anyway, it wasn't a good idea. Okay. So you were looking at family and friends. He had given me money to put into this operation to get it started. The business magazine I was with, they were business partners in it. Mm-hmm. So we had done everything correctly. So we were just very, very surprised that we didn't get it. There had to be something not correct. And that actually turned out to be the case.
Yeah.
So by kind of having belief, I suppose you had to have belief. But I couldn't have said then, Sam, what I know now, just how much belief and tenacity we had in those days. And of course, there was family and other friends, and then work colleagues. They were all involved, but none of us really understood, I don't think, what was achieved until looking back. And to also put it in context. Mm-hmm. Because we had to then, when we got the operation up and running, we had to send advertising around the country.
Okay.
And we were all using ISDN lines to record things. And also we were sending advertising reel-to-reel tapes, quarter-inch tapes, small versions, by courier. So we would have boxes. I actually have some of those boxes in my house still. Where all these were collated. So we would have stations like Tip FM, which is Tipperary, Tip FM. Mm-hmm. We would have had Radio Limerick. We would have had 96 FM, although it was called Cork County Radio at the time. Galway Bay FM, Kilkenny, Limerick, and you know. So all of these radio stations had to get their ads, which were now being centrally sold. The recording studios had to produce maybe 15 or 20 copies of the same reel. And then a courier company, the state courier company, would arrive at 4 or 4:30 and pick up 20 or 30 or 18, wherever number of radio stations the ad was going, and bring those to the radio station to be played. There was no, sense of sending things online. It was terribly, terribly early days. It was a fascinating time, but very different.
That's really, really interesting because right now, I'm trying to make out of the context. Right now, if you want to get an app, let's say not online, because that takes a process. But if you would like to do something in a podcast or in a radio station, then you would do some type of recording like what we're doing, and then just email that or send that file through the internet, and that would be it.
No, this is very different. And there were some very funny stories which I could go into, but we don't have all day. Where, on one particular occasion, when the national soccer team manager, a wonderful man called Jack Charlton, resigned from the position after we had had a few great years in the World Cup and things for a little country like Ireland. And there was advertising going for a national newspaper.
Yeah.
And suddenly the national manager resigned earlier by a few days, and the national paper had a whole feature. So we all had to, a number of us, there were 7 of us, drove to every radio station in the country through the night.
Okay.
All parts of the country, up and down through the night, with very little sleep, maybe 2 hours sleep in the car, and then driving to all these radio stations to get the new tape, literally the tape, the quarter-inch tape, to, or whatever way it was being distributed in those days. But it was, and then it became a type of disc, and anyway, it was all technology changed. To get it to the radio stations to load up into their studios in time for the breakfast program.
Okay.
So the ad wasn't recorded till 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening. We didn't leave Dublin, in our case, till 9 or 10 in the evening when it was ready. And then we drove up to all the radio stations. Then we met back in Dublin the next morning at 8 o'clock, and we'd done. But there was no other way. There was no, even then there wasn't, the ISDN wasn't possible, and certainly no digital type of transfer. No, all new.
Definitely. I mean, yeah, this is, for me, it's really interesting because, of course, I wasn't even born when this was happening. But going back into your story, I'm interested to know when you started to seek. I mean, because you've worked so hard on this years to get those connections. How did success look in your head? I mean, what were you envisioning before you got that contract?
Yes, very good question, Sam, and interesting, because I think a lot of people would say often the success is not as they had anticipated. The feeling of success is not as they had anticipated. So what happened with me was the connection. This sounds strange to say, but this is what happened. The connection with radio became less and less, and the connection and the business side of it, sales meetings, projections, marketing, and becoming a busy sales office became more and more, because that was my role. That's what I had wanted to achieve. Okay. I didn't have any on-air activity as I do now and did for many years then. That all stopped, and it was now all about satisfying the promise. We had promised to deliver a professional, sales-driven organization on behalf of advertisers and radio stations. We'd set up the model. We'd done all the work. We had hired people. We had the offices. We now had 22 people to do this work. Okay. But of course, it became a sales deadlines, targets, revenue, finance, and driving all that. And sometimes being able to listen to some of the radio stations that you were representing. But, again, there was no on-air and online apps. You couldn't download an app to listen to any radio station in the world. You couldn't even listen to the radio station in Cork that you were representing. You might, and these are the odd things that used to happen, you might ring up the station and they might put you on hold on their telephone system. That's how you heard the radio station. Wow, okay. Because they played the radio station on the phone system. Okay. Otherwise, you couldn't hear them. So it was very, very strange and different times. And then occasionally somebody would have an enormously powerful FM transmitter, and you would be asked, and you'd want to know anyway, driving in your car, how far the signal was reaching to see if their franchise area was being fulfilled and where the figures that were being given to you correct, or where they in fact just been overstated. So it was part of your job to find out if, in fact, the listenership figures were standing up. And then to assist in the foundation of a thing called the Joint National Listenership Research, the JNLR, to establish this. So this was the foundation of a whole new kind of way of looking at radio. Something we'd never had. So these figures, the branding, all the initiatives, initiatives that were taken on by the radio stations and by ourselves Because up to that, we had only had one radio station in Ireland, then followed by another national one. But for years and years, we had RTE, Radio Telefishern, which is the Gaelic or Radio Telefishern.
Okay.
Became RTE 1 and Radio 2, which became 2 FM. And they were the only radio stations, and we didn't even have the 2 FM one for years. The RTE National Radio, which was commercial radio, but this is another interesting point, but not every country would have that. It doesn't have it in Britain. The national radio station in Britain is the BBC.
Yeah.
No advertising.
Okay.
But in Ireland, the national radio station had advertising and a license arrangement, so they got revenue for that. So the local radio stations, the independent radio stations, had quite a battle on their hands to survive, to market themselves, to position themselves, to grow listenership. And that's what they did very successfully. We played our part, and we got ad revenue in those days quite sizably, up to about 4.5 million euros per annum from nothing, which was good for a network of what was, well, it grew to about 27 radio stations in those days. It's an awful lot more now.
Yeah.
So it's quite an achievement. But so in answer to your question, my stress levels, returned to quite a high level on an ongoing basis, because it was all about meetings and then meetings about meetings. And there were instances, you may appreciate this. You're living in a coastal destination. I'm living in a coastal destination. A lot of people like to go to the coast and visit cities and towns that are on the coast. And they don't tend to necessarily have an identity or an understanding of what we just loosely call the Midlands is. So you go from one coast to the other coast, and you don't always understand the Midlands, all the areas in between. So as a marketing proposition, to market an area which is the kind of an undefined area and isn't a big city like Madrid or Barcelona or some other place, or New York, or London, you can pick any European cities, Lisbon, that's all very easily identified. It's a large urban population, and advertisers want to buy those audiences. Yeah. But you talk about the Midlands in Ireland, we're only a small population of 4.5 million. It's quite not, it's transient, to say the least. And at least one or two media buyers who would be senior people would have said, well, our audiences, our advertisers, our clients don't really have a need to advertise to the Midlands. They just want to advertise to the places that people go. And I just drive through the Midlands. This is what they were saying. I just drive through the Midlands from Dublin to where I'm going, to the next large city, which in Ireland's case was Dublin, Cork, Limerick, Waterford, Galway, Belfast, and somewhere else. And they were all coastal destinations. So it became all those issues about working out what was the correct distribution of revenue to those other stations. And that all became a big job of listenership figures and apportioning money. And that's what media buying is all about. That's what it became.
Wow. Amazing. Yeah. And that thing that you said in the beginning, when you were discussing about how success changes, you had this idea in your initial state where you wanted to help radio and you wanted to centralize the sales for the radios, for the advertisements. And then when you get into this, because you started in radio, you realize that you are just distancing yourself from radio, and now you're having to manage this type of events of how do I distribute the earnings from this place or this place, and you didn't have any numbers. You didn't have how many listeners were buying from that advertising, so you could calculate what was the return on the investment from those advertisements. And there was no way to actually tell. So I mean,
in the early days, it was established. We did begin to get the listenership, but honestly, it was very difficult to explain to a radio station that had, say, 20 or 30,000 listeners, that they couldn't expect to get the same level of advertising revenue to a radio station at 75 or 80 or 100,000 listeners in a different part of the world. They had to accept that, but it was difficult for them because from their perspective, and understandably so, their overheads for running the radio station were exactly the same.
Yeah.
So you could absolutely understand. So what happened there was the balance between national advertisers and local advertisers was, I'm just taking a figure at the moment, was say 70% local advertisers and 30% national advertisers in those smaller stations where the listenership wasn't as large.
Okay.
But if you went to the larger stations, in Ireland's case, that would be in Dublin or Cork or Limerick or Galway or Waterford, they would have larger figures, listenership figures. Therefore, they could seek a larger amount of national advertising revenue. So in their case, it might be that national advertising would be 60% and local advertising might be 40%, as an example. I might have those figures wrong, but you can see what I mean.
Yeah,
definitely. They could deliver. And so therefore you could, if you were a national, we'll just take Santander, if you were a national advertiser or the post office here, you could plan to put a local message for a southern part of the country or the eastern part of the country or the western part of the country, but with a national campaign. So we got these tags in the end where a national advertising campaign would be put online, but the local station would then record a local tag. Okay. So you'd have a bank might say a main message, they'd give her a main message like, we're open to all mortgages now. We have the best rates around. Don't be surprised. Give us a call anytime. And then the local station would tag on at the end, your local bank in Tipperary is so-and-so somebody, Joey Malone Limited. Call them on. And that will be the tag at the end. Okay. So you'd often see that type of top and tail national campaigns going.
That's really, really interesting. That's really interesting. And going back to what you experienced and when you were experiencing those challenges and those problems and those threats and those hardships that put you together, that made you feel so stressful, how did you cope with your emotions? How did you move forward to that?
Yeah, it was difficult. My family were terrific. I was married at this stage, I don't know, 15, 20 years, something like that, because we were in the 90s at this stage. So a lot of support from my wife and family. And to be honest, a regret I have is that I ended up spending too much time at work, too much time at the job. And it's one of the consequences of being CEO of an organization. You don't get enough time to see your family. Yeah. And so my children grew up to be in their, I won't say early teens, but, almost 10, 11, 12, that sort of age. And during those first 10 years, I was very involved with the company and doing things. And I felt I spent too much time looking back, doing the things that I needed to build the company, to even get the contract in the first place. So that's a regret I have. So it does take its toll on you. But you're kind of driven by this, but I have to focus on this. I have to do this, or nobody else is going to do it. I have to do this. Yeah. So it takes you over. So I'm not sure if I realized then, as much as I do now, how my work and life balance suffered. And of course, nobody worked from home. You had to be in the city to see the people and do the networking. There was no connections of the sort we know about nowadays. So you had to be there. You had to be, as we called it, pressing the flesh, shaking hands, seeing people, having meetings. And part of that was socializing. And so that took a bit of time in the evening and different times. So thankfully it didn't spill into the weekend, but otherwise, generally your day was leave home at 7 o'clock in the morning, come home at 8:30 at night. Long days. So stressful. So to be honest, the model that we had set up in 1992 didn't work anymore. It needed to be a different model. But by that time, I was also very, very happy to be moving out of it and into a different area and allow other people, allow is the wrong word, succumb to other people to take to take on the contract and move it forward from there correctly. So, because I felt people could do this better. So I think as the instigator, as one of the founders, as a person with the idea, I think you have to realize your own level of ability. And then also you decide, what do I really want to do for the next 20 years? And it wasn't that.
Okay.
So I was quite happy to and we came to an accommodation where I stepped aside. The whole organization changed in the structure, and it moved on very successfully, and is a highly successful organization now.
Okay.
Known as Independent Radio Sales here in Ireland, or IRS. And you have other ancillary services associated with the distribution of news and all types of sharing. Well, I must say that one of the things I'm most proud about, and I really am proud about this, is during that era, we set up a thing called the Radio Advertising Awards. In 1993 was the first National Radio Advertising Awards, which then became, nowadays, a different type of award scheme. But it was the first national award scheme for independent radio in Ireland, and it's still very strong now, and has done a great job in first of all, in those days, showcasing great radio advertising, and then that moved on to great radio programs and programming and presenters, and that really is the format of it nowadays. Although this year I'm not quite sure how it's operating in the current difficult circumstances with the virus, but I'm not in the business nowadays, so I'm not quite as aware. But I'm very proud of setting up that. And one of the ministers at the time, I was introduced as Mr. Local Radio, which I was quite proud about at that time and for a period. So yeah, proud period, lovely period, great people to work with, but also some, we would call them people in the long grass waiting for you. And that's what happened as well. So that's the way it goes. Very happy now. That was that era, and now happy to be in a different place.
That's really interesting. And what I'm interested to now learn is about that transformation that led you to the Don that is today, from the Don that started being a DJ back there. What do you believe has changed in your perspective from that moment into the moment of those stresses, or later on when you left the organization?
Well, it's interesting again. Around about 2008, well, first of all, 2008, worldwide, there was a global financial crash.
Yeah.
So 2008 was very, very difficult days.
Yeah.
It was difficult days for me. It was difficult days for business. It was difficult days for everybody. So the financial crash came, and I was operating then as a small, there was only 3 people in the business, and we were operating a little consultancy for radio advertising, radio promotions, and copywriting, and all types of things. And then in general advertising as well, but it was small. And then, so in 2008, 2009 was the beginning, if you like, maybe a little bit earlier, of the digital age, in the 2000s anyway, between there and 2000. So I felt to have something that I could operate in the digital space, which wasn't just making ads for social media or, any of the things that came along out of that period. And the most, I suppose, ongoing feeling I had that I was a good person in conversation. I wasn't a bad interviewer. I'd done a lot of interviews over the years on the radio stations. And so I was asked, Samaritans are a national organization for helping people to be listened to and phone up for online support, if you like, just to be listened to, tell their story. And they were a client of mine, also from the point of view of telling people about their services in a radio advertising way. So the national director asked me, because she knew my background, would I go to the national conference and conduct interviews with the people who they call their volunteers, the people who manned the telephones, who were at the other end of telephone lines to listen to people about their issues and give them support. Now, just to say about Samaritans, that's a national organization in the UK and Ireland and elsewhere perhaps, but you'll never ring up from Dublin and speak to somebody from Dublin.
Okay.
You'll never ring up from Manchester in
Hmm.
England and speak to somebody from Manchester.
Okay.
That will never ever happen. You
Okay.
will speak to somebody somewhere else who will never have a recognition of your voice by somebody who's at the other end of the telephone line. It doesn't happen. But the national director wanted to know what the people who worked for them, the volunteers, the people who manned those telephones, um, had they had experienced to bring them to the position that they wanted to be a volunteer. So I was asked to go up and conduct interviews at the national conference with them over 2 days and get some stories together. And this is key to the next development of my career.
Hmm.
I went with what was then a Marantz recording device on cassette.
Okay.
I didn't have a digital recorder,
Hmm.
and recorded interviews with them. And the Marantz radio recorder was a great little system, but it was still, it was cassette, and but it did the job. And
Okay.
so it got me thinking about this whole thing. And I said, there's a business in this. Lots of people want to get this type of feedback.
Hmm.
That worked out very, very, very well. I got terrific stories and insights into what people had experienced and the stories that they had suffered, really, and relatives to bring to the point that they wanted to listen to other people. So
Okay.
that led on to me establishing Talkback and the idea of conducting feedback interviews and gathering that type of data and informal type of feedback for clients and other people so that they could hear what people are really talking to them. And I felt it was sort of experiential feedback. It was on the moment, in the moment. It
Hmm.
wasn't a feedback survey a week or a day or ages afterwards. It was a survey on the spot about what are you experiencing now in this room with other people.
Yeah.
And so it captured the moment then. Often it was anonymous. I didn't need the people's names. Really, there was nothing to do with it. It was just their views and their stories.
Yeah.
And so people were very willing to give me their thoughts. And because it was audio, it wasn't video, they were fairly forthcoming. And it was my skill and my job to draw them out a bit, just as you are with me today, and get their views in a comfortable way, that they were happy to be listened to. And I suppose during that time I became a good listener, which is how I got the phrase, the leadership listener coach, which is what I am now. But it all began there of listening to people.
Hmm.
And I suppose on a very basic level, I've always been a radio listener. I love listening to radio. So even that started off the progress for me of becoming a good listener, and empathy and active listening and understanding that people need to be listened to by looking at their body language as well as just what they say. So that really gripped me. And shortly afterwards then, because I'd set up Talkback, I was asked by an airline, DHL Air, to get involved with their pilots and engineers to find out what their views were. And that became the next phase of my career. But that was the first thing, Sam, to answer your question, being asked by somebody. We have a phrase over here, necessity is the mother of invention. It was because I was asked to do it. I said, how can I do this? Then I came back and I wrote down all of the interviews, all the clips
Okay.
into a large document. So I had the words. I didn't have although I had them on tape as well, it wasn't tape in those days. But I didn't have to hand them, so people's voices wouldn't be recognized if they didn't want it. But everything was transcribed. And then that went on for years, and we formed advertising and some good plans arising from that experiential feedback.
Whoa, amazing, amazing. I really love the transformation because you started to set out as a DJ and as a presenter for the independent radio, a pirate radio, and then you evolve into this businessman who is focused in sales, and then you move away from radio. You're facing all of this, and now after that amazing experience of listening to people from that perspective of actually listen to what they're saying and actually having empathy with them, now you're this new person who has gone through this transformation, and right now you are just focused on that. And yeah, tell me more about Don right now. What are you currently doing? What is your focus right now?
Yeah, well, the origins were where I mentioned, and it became clear to me. And there's another important thing. I became part of a peer group,
Mm-hmm.
um, Paul, the Pi group we called it,
Mm-hmm.
where there was a group of people, like-minded individuals, met every month
Mm-hmm.
for a monthly meeting, and supported each other with ideas and hearings. And so the idea was you would have boasts, as in, I did a great thing. You'd have a target of, this is what I want to aim to next month. And you have accountability from those people that sat around the table. Usually there was 6 or 5 or 4 of us. And
Okay.
we met every month, and we said to people what we wanted to do. We spoke about what we had done and challenges. And during the course of that,
Okay.
it was said to me, this will be in the 2000s.
Okay.
It said to me, Don, you mention radio so much. You talk about radio so much. You know, is it not the fact that you really want to be back on radio? It clarified to me something that was going around in my head, but sometimes you need somebody else to say it to you, to bring it out.
Yeah.
It's true. So very quickly, I got myself to a position that I could go back on the radio,
Uh-huh.
this time with a real local radio station
Okay.
called Dublin City FM. And I did a radio program then for 10 years called You and Your Business.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of those programs are up on my website, talkback.ie, as podcasts. The radio station is a Dublin station. It's a very successful radio station in Dublin.
Mm-hmm.
And it gave me that real enjoyment of being back on the radio. I've interviewed a lot of people. I've enjoyed them. I've met some great people. I've kept all those contacts. And so now I'm going to get to the next phase. Now, of course, there's a little bridge here that's missing, which is in 2009, I became a coach as well. I'm trying to be a coach because I felt that thing of going back to Samaritans again, wanting to help people, wanting to listen to people, wanting to empower them to get to the next stage, became a drive. And I wanted to become a coach, although I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know what it was called. I just knew I wanted to do things to help people. And somebody else who I did know was a coach, a good friend of mine, said to me, "You'd be a great coach, Don, actually. I think you'd be a great coach. You should do that." So I trained to be a coach. And that then over the years has really assisted me to listen better to people and to, I suppose, give myself an aim for the next 20 or 30 years
Okay.
as to what the rest of my career would be. And very importantly, I did realize during that 90s period and even the early 2000s, do you know what? If I'm not enjoying doing the work, I'm not going to do the work very well. So it became very much a question of love the work you do and do the work you love. And that's where I am. I really enjoy my career now, and I can see longevity in it. I'll be starting a podcast soon. I'm hoping to be back on the radio. I haven't actually put the program idea to the broadcast yet, but I'll find a home somewhere. And so I'll realize that dream again. So yeah, back to basics. Back to basics. Do what you do best and what you enjoy best, because that way you'll never work a day in your life.
Definitely. Such a powerful thing to actually realize that you are enjoying what you're doing, and that doesn't mean work, but just life. And yeah, wow, amazing. I really love the transformation. I really love the whole story and all the ups and downs that you have told me about that. One thing that I'm missing that I would like to know from you, and I think this can help a lot of people that might be listening. What will you tell to people that might face similar challenges in the future as the challenges that you faced, not only with Airtime when you launched, but also when you were successful and you had these stresses, and also when you were doing the coaching certification or this process? What would you say to those people?
Well, there's an important incident that happened along here that I should say, because it ties in very well to your question, which was that in towards the end of 2014, I had a medical adventure whereby I suffered a perforated bowel and a burst appendix
Okay.
on the same day, which is a serious medical condition, which I didn't know about at the time until it happened. And I was rushed in, had a large operation, 8 hours. I could have died. I went into resus twice.
Oof.
So I'm very lucky to be here. And during the recuperation period, which was a number of months, and you get a colostomy bag attached to you for a while, and then that gets reversed. So during most of 2015, I had this colostomy bag. I was still working with DHL Air. I was still engaging with their pilots and the engineers and getting all that feedback. And during all that time, made me realize very much how fallible we all are and what can happen to change things, so that suddenly a lot of the things you were going to do would not be achievable.
Yeah.
So I made a conscious decision to do the things during the next few years that I always wanted to do. So I bought a new canoe. I like canoeing. I can go on the waters around here in Dublin quite easily. I bought a new guitar. I know you play the guitar. You're an accomplished guitarist and pianist.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it was a question of whatever you were going to do, get on with it, because you never know what's around the corner. I've got grandchildren now. My own children are grown up. I mightn't have been here. My wife has been terrific in her support. Absolutely brilliant. Now she's not terribly well, so I'm keeping an eye on her.
Yeah.
We've moved house. That all took a while. But the driving thing was keep going, keep going. And it's not what happens. It's what you do after shit happens that makes the difference as to how you recover and what your attitude to it is. You need to have positive people around you. You need to be a positive person. You need to do plenty of reading, expose yourself to pitfalls. And as I think I saw somewhere, maybe it's through your own podcast, your very successful podcast, I saw, oh, do you know what it was? It was also part of the Joe Biden inauguration. Failing in life is inevitable. Giving up is unforgivable. I think that's such a fantastic quotation.
I'm really, really thankful for you being here and having the courage to share your story. I really admire everyone who has the courage to be here and just tell it, because I think for you might be easy, or for me might be easy, but for many people around the world might be something out of the world. Like, how would I share my failures so publicly? So I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you for the invitation. I do think it's important for people to be able to pass on their stories. I also think in this age of remote working more and more, people working from home, or at least remotely, if it's not home, it might be a serviced office or an open community, that they have the opportunity to tap in and to talk about their situations and be listened to.
Many first-time founders forget about a well-known tool that helps you in the process of designing a business strategy to avoid many common pitfalls. The pestle analysis focuses in analyzing the current context in which the business will be developed and how those factors can impact the future of your business by proposing risks and challenges that could potentially kill your project. This analysis helps you understand much better how to design the correct strategy to mitigate risks associated with political, social, economical, technological, legal, and environmental risks that can potentially impact your project. Don's project was impacted by political, economical, and legal factors that slowed down his progress and even sent him through extreme periods of stress. The key for this analysis to work is that you, as a founder, have to periodically review it and modify it as necessary, identifying with percentages which are the factors that can impact the most of your business, and then create the right strategies to mitigate those risks. This broadens your perspective of your business, letting you to see an area of the forest instead of being only focused in one tree. Thank you for watching. Our goal is to help founders see failure from a different perspective. If you like this episode, remember to like the video and let us know in the comments what have you learned from failure. Are you interested in learning more? You can check our Patreon for exclusive content and subscribe to our mailing list for weekly updates. You will find the links for that in the description of this video. Remember to subscribe to our channel to receive notifications when we publish new videos.